Hello and welcome to your Project Management Planner for RBE 2001. You should have received in an email from your instructor a link to your team's particular planner. This is something you'll use during the entire term. In this video I'll be going over how to set up the planner and how to use it in conjunction with your classwork. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll notice that there are a number of tabs: instructions, team, calendar, and so on. And I encourage you to click between them, take a look at what they are. Right now we're on instructions, then there's team, calendar, project backlog, sprint manager, project burnup, scrums, and sprint retrospectives. It may seem like a lot, but it will become fairly second nature once you've used it a little bit. If we begin with the Team tab, this is where we want you to enter the names of all of your team members, the mobile phone numbers if you're willing, and we certainly do want your email address. This is so that we can contact you if we need to, if there's any issue or a suggestion that we want to share with you. Getting into the Calendar tab, we begin to see something that is now dealing with the actual meat of the course that you're in, RBE 2001. We will be using a sprint layout whereby, if you look at this, there's a calendar on the right which looks like a waterfall or a Gantt chart, and you'll notice that there are dates along the top, and there are 7 sprints that will consume the entire term. Whether it's a term or whatever term it might be, it'll be about 7 weeks. If you look at the left, you are able to edit this. I would recommend not to change this very much. You can use this, however, as a way to set up your planning. If you look at it, there are a number of milestones shown, and these correlate one-to-one with the major deliverables or events that occur during this term. So, there's things like soldering the reflectance sensor, which is quite simple, getting your sensor array calibrated, working with the first gripper, line following, and on and on. And by the time you have reached all of these milestones, and you'll see that they're reflected over here in the calendar, once you have completed all of these items, you have completed the course. But this is not enough detail yet to really drive what you're doing on a day-to-day or a week-by-week basis. This is provided as a top-level set of milestones and a calendar for the sprints that are related to it, so that you can begin to determine, let's say for example, this first gripper where you need to do torque calculations. Well, that happens here, which is around 9/6, and you look at it and you say, well, that deliverable is coordinated with the end of sprint 1. So you would, I think, correctly conclude that during sprint 1, which is this 1 week period, notice each sprint is 1 week long, that during sprint 1 you should be working on any milestones that are to be completed at the end of that particular sprint. So sprint 1, you'd be finishing these items. Sprint 2, which is this line here, you'd want to be finishing these 3 items: the linkage synthesis, your second gripper, and you want to demonstrate positioning. Now, these terms, for example, like demonstrate positioning, that is just a shorthand for a much longer description, and we would be well advised to look at the supporting document that the professor provides that talks in detail about what that means. This tool is for planning. It's intentionally not wordy, no paragraphs here. But you might say, okay, well, this is not enough detail. These are the major deliverables. Where's the detail? Well, then we move to the next tab, which is the Project Backlog tab, and here are all of the items in much finer detail and you're welcome to read through it, starting at the very top. And I want to describe this page because it's something that you will use as a source of the items that you should be working on, but we're not going to tell you in which sprint you should put them. It's up to you to look at the milestones and the deliverables and to copy them as appropriate. And I'll go over how to do that, how to copy them into the given sprints in the thing called the Sprint Manager, which is over here. So we've looked at the calendar, which shows the major milestones, puts them on a Gantt chart, a simple Gantt chart. Then we go over to the backlog. Again, just as before, each of these items is described in much greater detail in other documents, and you should be looking at that. But let's look for a moment at this particular tab, because there are things here that you might not recognize right away. Take, for example, this first group that are shown in a gray background. Well, why are they gray? They're gray because they've already been moved, or actually copied, into sprints. Now, let me go over there briefly so you know what the destination is. I'll go to the Sprint Manager, and sure enough, here is Sprint 0, Sprint 1. It shows the starting date, the length of it, the ending date, and it talks about what the status is of each of these sprints. And I'll be talking in much more detail about this page, but I wanted you to see how, for example, there's this thing called solder reflectance sensor. Well, where did that come from? I go back to the project backlog, and sure enough, here is an item, solder reflectance sensor. And then in the column immediately after the name is a thing I call here the point value. Well, what is point value? It's something that you assign. Notice from below here, they're all set at 1. Well, they're not going to be 1 by the time you get going. What this is an estimate. It's just your best guess on how hard, how risky, or how much work. It's kind of an amalgam of all three of those things together. And the higher the number, the more work you have to do, and the more risk you have in that particular item. So take for example, you need to calibrate your reflectance sensor array, which is this item here. I gave it a point value of 3. Now 3 is not high. I mean, you can go much higher, but 3 is not 1 either. There's a fair bit of work, there's a little bit of work involved in doing it. So I gave it a 3. So if we go over to the Sprint Manager, where the calibrate reflectance sensor array, you'll see that point value did carry through. And then likewise, if I go to Sprint 1, here are the various things that I moved into Sprint 1. Now again, referring back to the calendar, when does Sprint 1 occur? It happens here from 8:30 to 9:06. So during that sprint, or Sprint 1, you should have already finished everything in Sprint 0 and moved, and now your focus is Sprint 1, and there we are, we're working on Sprint 1, everything in there. And we'll talk about how to manage that as a group. So again, going back to the Sprint Manager, we have all the items that have been moved over. I use the word move. I really mean copied. We're not moving them in. We're going to leave them in the backlog, but we are going to mark the backlog for which ones have already been transferred, let's say, over to the Sprint Manager. You notice that gray background again. Anytime you copy a task name with its respective point value over to a sprint, whatever that sprint might be, you come back here, you highlight this, and you set the background by using the fill color to a gray background. So now I've set that one to gray. I'm not ready to do it. I mean, I'm going to undo that, but I wanted you to see that then I would then move that. Let's say, for instance, that I want to copy this. I'm going to right-click and say Copy. I'm right-click and Copy. Then I go over to the Sprint Manager, and let's say I want to make it the first item in the in Sprint 2. So I'll right-click and paste, and there they are. Now, I made a little mistake here. I kind of did it on purpose. Notice that it carried over the gray background. Not a fatal error, no big deal, but it's preferred to do your copying first and then set the gray back in the backlog. No big deal. I'll just highlight these two, go up to the fill, and set it for white or no or reset. Either one has the same effect. I'll set it for reset, and now it's white. And so now I've copied that item into Sprint 2. We're not doing Sprint 2 right now, but I'm looking forward to it. And one of the tasks that you're going to be doing in a very early lab, you're going to be copying every item from the backlog into the appropriate sprint. And if I scroll down, you'll notice I've got sprint 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. There's even a 7 there in case you have a bigger project. And we will populate this entire page. And by the time we've done that, and it happens very early in the course during your first lab, then by the time you've done that, everything in this list will be gray, which basically is your clue that you are now ready to do that. Doesn't mean you've done them yet, but you're ready to do them, and they've been moved into an appropriate sprint. Okay, well, now that we've looked a little bit at the kind of the mechanics of moving things around, let's actually do one, and we're going to move a few items into the Sprint Manager from the backlog, and this is an important moment to realize that, take for example this item, I'm going to highlight it here, the second gripper is constructed. Well, that's an event. That isn't, yes, I mean there's a lot of work involved, but that alone does not adequately describe what it takes to arrive at that finished item. We need to go back to the project backlog, and what we'll find is that for many of the milestones there are multiple tasks that need to be done that will lead to that completion. So we're looking for anything pertaining to the second gripper. Now before I leave here, let's take a look. That line item is right here. See it? This right there. And it is to be completed at the end of sprint 2. Okay. That means that anything that we find related to the second gripper needs to be done no later than sprint 2. I mean, it could be done earlier. That's your choice, but definitely has to be done prior to the end of the second sprint. So let's go back to the backlog and we'll hunt. Well, let's see. There's an item, determine second gripper design. That's not sufficient, but you got to do it. Calculate torque requirement, acquire and fabricate the gripper parts, assemble and test the second gripper, and you might also want to test the potentiometer for the second gripper. So it is conceivable that all these items, 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe even 5, and we'll find they may all need to be put into the second sprint, meaning that second sprint is going to be one busy time, and you need to have the people there ready to take care of it. If you find that you don't have enough people, you may want to push some of these items forward or back, and you may want to massage this whole plan a little bit. But let's go. We're going to take, for example, determine second gripper design. Now, remember I mentioned a moment ago that everything from here down is now set for a point value of 1. That's not really real. That's just a placeholder. What is it going to take to determine what kind of design you want for the second gripper? That might be a lot of work. It might be a 5 or an 8. It might take some real, going through a decision matrix or whatever you might do as a team. I'm going to give it a 5 for right now. You can change it later. Don't feel like you're locked into it. calculate the servo torque requirement. Let's give it a 3. To acquire and fabricate, well, it's not that it's necessarily hard, but it might take a fair bit of time, so I'm going to give it a 5. Assemble and test, maybe a 3, maybe a 5, could even be higher. But let's take these items that I've just indicated and copy them as a group over into Sprint 2. So we're going to right-click, select it, right-click, and copy. Go over to the Sprint Manager, go down to Sprint 2, right-click, and paste. And now all of those items are now copied into Sprint 2 with their appropriate point value. Great. Job's not quite done yet, right? We have to go back to the backlog and fill what's still selected, by the way, with that gray color that we looked at before. And now we've kind of finished the loop, at least in terms of moving them over to the Sprint Manager. And sure enough, there they are, but no one's been assigned to them. Now I'm going to jump the gun a little bit here because I want you to see a little bit more about the mechanism of working with the planner. Let's say that we've got a team of 4 people. It is not good form, even though I've done it a little bit above, it's not good form to say the whole team is working on everything. That's not real project management. If everybody's working on everything, you kind of missed the point. What we really want to be able to do is to say that, for example, on the second determining the gripper design, that we have 2 of our members, maybe member 1 and member 2. Now, what would show up here would be the real name. I haven't filled in the names in the team tab. Remember, if I go back to team tab, here are the names. Well, I haven't filled them in yet. Had I done so, in fact, I'm going to change team member 3 to be a real name. I'll give it like Jacob Sperry. Anyone who's been around remembers Jacob. Okay, Jacob Sperry. Now it was team member 3. Now it's Jacob Sperry. I'm going to go back to the Sprint Manager, and I'm going to say for calculations. Now notice there's Jacob Sperry, and I choose that, and sure enough, it shows up. And Jacob, boy, he's the person who's going to get that done. Okay. Again, looking forward a little bit. What do we do with it? We haven't done anything. We've just kind of created this template ready for us to begin doing work. Now imagine that we are currently in Sprint 2. In other words, it is now on or after September 6th, because that's the beginning of Sprint 2. And we have our first Scrum. Oh, well, I haven't mentioned that word before. What is a Scrum? It is a very short meeting, sometimes called a stand-up meeting. Anyone who's taken anything knows a little bit about Agile. You know what a Scrum is. You get together as a group, and it's a quick meeting. You're not there to talk about in length any technical issues or planning issues. It's a quick, let's say we're now at our first Scrum, having started Sprint 2 a day or 2 ago. You got to do multiple Scrums per sprint, by the way. You don't just do one. And in that sprint, we ask team member 1 and 2, so how you doing? Okay? Is the gripper design, have you decided on a gripper design? And they tell you that, yep, we've started working on it, so it's in process. Notice it changed color. And that we are now 25% done, and sure enough, there's a bar graph showing here, and of the 5 points, well, 25, 1/4 of 5 is 1 1/4. Wow, great. So that means we've now given ourselves credit for having progressed. This is very important. If we do it this way and really do it, we will know at a glance how well we're doing right now or at any moment. Are we on track? Are we behind? And we'll talk about more, because when we get to the project Burnup chart, that will show us graphically whether we're on track or not. Now Jacob says, you know what? I looked at it, but I got a problem. I don't have enough information. I am currently blocked. Oops. Well, obviously you're not going to have any percentage, and the red color is a clue for the next Scrum, and certainly by the retrospective, which happens at the end of each sprint. That's a red flag. It's intentionally red to say we got a problem here. Either we need to get Jacob more help, more information, or we need to push that item into a future sprint. Or maybe we pivot. Maybe we don't do that. I'm not, in this particular case, you got to do it, but there may be features that you could leave out or bypass because you get blocked. Let's say, for instance, that this one is assigned to team member 2 and team member 4, okay, just like before, and that they get to a Scrum and they say, guys, we just flew, it went so easily, it is completed, and I'll select, of course, 100%. So in that case, we get the full value, 5, and life is good. So you're starting to see the different things that can occur at a Scrum. Now I'm going to emphasize, the Scrums need to occur multiple times per sprint. I'd say no fewer than 2, more likely 3 or 4, which means you're doing it maybe not every day, but every couple of days during that week. The more you Scrum, the better, and if you keep them short, they become a non-issue. You do not have to be face-to-face to do a Scrum. You can do it over, a chat page, or you can do it in a Zoom meeting, or whatever suits you. But the point is, you need to find out from each of these responsible members at that moment in time how much they've completed on the task or tasks that they are responsible for. That's the purpose of the Scrum. All right, now we're going to fast forward a little bit. Imagine that you've already moved all the items. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm just showing you items that were randomly moved for the purposes of showing the planner. Do not try to copy what I've done here because it doesn't make sense. It's just to show the mechanics of the planner. Okay, but I've moved things into sprints, and we've already completed sprint 0 and 1, and looked to see, sure enough, everything's marked in green, completed, 100%, and we're going to start getting some information about how well we're doing, the progress. For example, for that sprint, we finished 100% of it. Here, we didn't do this last item at all, the coding and testing of line following. What happened? I'm not sure. It didn't get done. So we didn't get full credit for it. We're at 79%, but now we're in sprint 2. We probably should have copied that one forward, but we didn't. It's a mistake. But here we are, we're working on sprint 2, and we're not finished with sprint 2. Let's say we're now, instead of it being September 6th, it might be September 8th or 9th. So how have we done? We've finished, from time point of view, we're now not quite half done with the time period, but we have finished 36%. But take a look, one of the items, this last item here, is blocked. We're going to have to deal with it. Let's go now to take the whole, what I'm leading up to here is to take a look at the project Burnup chart. Okay, here we go. In the project Burnup chart, the blue line is the sum total of all of the possible points that we could have gotten by any given sprint. And notice that at sprint 1, we're a little bit behind. We're below it. We're below the line. Well, let's go back and take a look why. And the reason is that in sprint 1, we didn't do this item. And we say, oh, that's an error. We really did do it. So let's set it as completed and 100%. And now we'll go back to the burnup, and sure enough, sprint 1 is in lockstep with where we should be. And sprint 2 has progressed, but maybe not as much as we needed to. And the interesting thing here is that you now have a visual indicator of, graphically, the progress to date. If we're below it, well, obviously, because we look at it, let's go back and look at sprint 2. Sprint 2 is in process, and of all of the points that are in this sprint, we've finished not even half of them. We finished about a little over a third, or 36%. It makes perfect sense. And so let's say we go to the next Scrum and we get to 50% on that one, and that one gets completed, and this will actually we'll mark that as completed, so we help ourselves. This one gets completed, and somehow, because we're clever and wonderful, we're now able to unblock it. We finished half of it, and now we're at the 60% mark. Let's go back and take a look at the burnup, and sure enough, 2 is looking a lot healthier. Now 3 and 4 and 5 and beyond, they're nowhere because we're not in those sprints yet. What's most interesting at this moment in time is that sprint 1 is on track. Sprint 2, depending on the date, may be on track, and then we will continue in time, and we haven't missed a beat. We're now in lockstep with where we should be. It appears that we're there, and we can feel very confident in our progress. All right, let's do a walk through a scenario where we're now in sprint 0. We're 2 days in, and we need to begin recording what's going on. Figure it's 8:25, and we inquire of the team because the participants for this one are the whole team. And the consensus we get is that for each item, each of these 4 items, that we are in process and that they are 1/4 done, which is 25%. So we're going to mark them all at 25%. Well, we've recorded the progress, but we haven't recorded the fact that we had the Scrum in the first place. We'll go over to the Scrums tab. Remember, it's 8:25. Enter the date, and the status or the comment is all okay. Great. You don't need to write a book. Let's continue. Now, a couple of days go by. Again, we inquire of the team. We're still in process. We've now progressed to the 50% mark for everything but the second item, the soldering. Having a problem with soldering. What happened? The iron died. We had to get another iron. But on this Scrum, which is on and now 8:25, 8:27, we're a little bit behind on the soldering. Everything else looks not great, but not terrible. So we're having our Scrum. Let's go down. We're going to record the Scrum. You always got to record it. 8-27, and we write a comment that soldering stopped, iron broken. Well, not only should you write down the status, but you should write down what corrective action you're going to take, and we need to get a new iron. This is not rocket science. You're going to get another iron. So we go back to the sprint manager, and now it's 8:29. We got 1 day left, and the good news is that everybody has progressed, and in fact, the soldering is done. The reflectance sensor project is done. This is at 75%. Looks like we might be able to catch up. We're doing okay. So now it's 8:29. The report is 8:29. The soldering is completed. all okay otherwise. And finally, we get to 8:30. We're going to go back to Sprint Manager. It's now 8:30. This is an interesting moment. This is not a Scrum anymore because we are now at the end of the sprint. We're about to do a sprint retrospective, which we'll talk about in detail in a moment. And we're, in effect, the sprint retrospective is like a Scrum on steroids. So we'll stop here, and we're going to continue up with retrospectives. All right, now sprint 0 is done from a date point of view, and we're meeting for our first sprint retrospective in the lab meeting, the lab day. I want to point out here that if you are a Wednesday lab, the dates here are correct. If you are a Thursday lab, you need to add in your mind one day to each of the dates in the planner. Anyway, so here we are. It's 8:30. The Wednesday groups are done with their sprint. If you're a Thursday group, imagine now that it's 8:31. Okay, and so the first thing we do, just like we do in a Scrum, is we indicate the status of each of the items that the tasks that we've been working on. They're all at 100%. They're all completed. We mark them as such. You've got to keep the chart up to date. And now we are ready to look forward to sprint 1, the next sprint. Well, what hasn't been done here is that we have all the items here, but we haven't said who's working on what. This is it's a meeting of minds, who has the time available, who has the skill set, what, if you want to do pairing, what 2 or 3 people should be working together. Now I'm just going to arbitrarily put in people's names here, but of course you will do it more carefully based on the available people that you have, trying not to overload anyone. Here, for example, this Andrea has 3 things. That's too much. Jim has 1. We can give him 2. Jose, where is he? Jose has 1. We give him another 1. Let's see. We may need to load up a little bit. Barbara has 1. And now the final one, does anyone have only 1 or 2? Jim comes forward and says, you know what? I can handle the other 2 things, and I can take this on as well. Don't worry. I got it. So as a group, you decide how you're going to split up the work. Maybe what you have is Jim works with Jose, so at least to spread it around a little bit. All right. Anyway, so now you are ready to enter sprint 1. It's now 8:30. You haven't done anything yet on sprint 1, but if you look at how the screen is set up right now, in fact, you are ready to now proceed, and it's like it's rinse repeat. You're now in the new sprint, and you continue through, and then you begin doing scrums and doing the work for sprint 1. This concludes the video. If you have questions, please reach out to your SA, LA, or other faculty. We'll be happy to help you, and I do hope that you find project management a useful tool for making sure that you finish projects on time and with the greatest quality. Thank you for viewing.